6. The Communist League. During the year 1847 the communist colony in Brussels had grown to quite considerable proportions, although there was no one in the group who could measure himself with Marx or Engels. Occasionally it seemed as though either Moses Hess or Wilhelm Wolff, both of whom contributed to the Deutsche Brusseler Zeitung, might play the third in the alliance, but in the end neither of them did. Hess was never quite able to brush away his earlier philosophic cobwebs. And finally the painfully severe fashion with which the Communist Manifesto dealt with his writings led to a complete breach between him and Marx and Engels. The friendship of Marx and Engels with Wilhelm Wolff was of a later date, Wolff having come to Brussels only in the spring of 1846. But it proved to be a staunch one and ended only with the death of Wolff, which unfortunately occurred very early. He was not an independent thinker, but as a writer he had the popular manner. He came from the ranks of the Silesian serf peasantry, and under tremendous difficulties he had worked his way up to the university, where he fed a white-hot hatred against the oppressors of his class on the works of the great thinkers and poets of classic antiquity. As a demagogue he had for several years been dragged from one Silesian fortress to the next, and afterwards had earned his living as a private teacher whilst, at the same time, conducting ceaseless guerrilla warfare against the bureaucracy and the censorship, until the filing of new proceedings against him caused him to go abroad in preference to rotting in a Prussian prison. From his stay in Breslau he was friendly with Lassalle, who, together with Marx and Engels, has laid imperishable laurels on his grave. Wolff was one of those noble natures who, in the words of the poet, pay their way in life with what they are themselves. His steadfast character, his incorruptible loyalty, his scrupulous conscientiousness, his invariable unselfishness and his never-failing modesty made him an exemplary revolutionary fighter and won him the respect of both friends and foes, irrespective of whether they supported or hated his political opinions. Another member of the circle around Marx and Engels, though not quite so intimate with them, was Ferdinand Wolff. Ernst Tronk, who had written an excellent book about pre-March Berlin and been sentenced to 2 years' imprisonment in a fortress for alleged lèse-majesté, arrived in the circle at the last moment, having made his escape from the fortress of Wiesel. Another member of the inner circle was Georg Wirth, who was acquainted with Engels from the latter's Manchester days and who had lived in Bradford as an employee of another German firm. Wirth was a real poet, and in consequence he was free from all the affectations of the poetaster. He too, unfortunately, died young, and as yet no reverent hand has gathered together the verses which he sang in the spirit of the fighting proletariat and carelessly scattered. The circle of intellectuals was strengthened by a number of capable artisans, men like Karl and Stefan Born, the two compositors of the Deutsche Brusseler Zeitung. Brussels, as the capital of a state which boasted that it was an exemplary bourgeois monarchy, was the best place to establish international connections as long as Paris, which was still regarded as the center of the revolution, was stifled by the notorious September laws. Marx and Engels had established good relations with the participants in the Revolution of 1830 in Belgium. In Germany, and particularly in Cologne, they had old and new friends, above all Georg Jung and the physicians, Destu and Daniels. In Paris Engels had established connections with the Socialist Democratic Party and in particular with its literary representatives, Louis Blanc and Ferdinand Flocon, who edited Reform, the organ of the party. Still closer relations existed with the revolutionary wing of the Chartists, with Julian Honey, the editor of the Northern Star, and Ernest Jones, who had been educated in Germany. The Fraternal Democrats, an international organization in which the League of the Just was represented by Karl Schapper, Joseph Moll and others, was strongly under the intellectual influence of these Chartist leaders. In January 1847, the League took a very important step. As the Communist Correspondence Committee in London, it maintained relations with the Correspondence Committee in Brussels, but these relations were mutually somewhat frigid. On the one side there was mistrust of the intellectuals, who could not possibly know just where the shoe pinched the workers, and on the other side there was mistrust of the strawbingers. That is to say, of the artisan guild narrow-mindedness which was still strong amongst the German workers at that time. Engels had his hands full with the job of keeping the strawbingers in Paris away from the influence of Proudhon and Welding, but he felt that the strawbingers in London were made of better stuff. Although he characterized an address which the League of the Just had issued in the autumn of 1846 in connection with the Schleswig-Holstein question as sheer rubbish. The strawbingers in England, he declared, had learned nothing from the English apart from their folly of ignoring all existing concrete conditions and their failure to grasp the process of historical development. A good decade later Marx referred to his erstwhile attitude towards the League of the Just in the words, "We issued a series of pamphlets, some of them printed, others lithographed, mercilessly criticizing the mixture of Anglo-French socialism or communism and German philosophy which represented the secret teachings of the League. We put forward instead a scientific insight into the economic structure of bourgeois society as the only tenable basis, and set forth in a popular form the principle that the task was not to work out a utopian system but to participate consciously in the historic process of social transformation taking place before our eyes." In January, 1847, the League sent a member of its Central Committee, the watchmaker Joseph Moll, to Brussels to request Marx and Engels to join the organization as it intended to adopt their views, and Marx attributed this step to the efficacy of the pamphlets. Unfortunately, none of the pamphlets referred to by Marx has been preserved, with the exception of the circular against Krieger, who is ridiculed in it as, amongst other things, the emissary and prophet of an Essene association, the League of Justice. He is also accused of mystifying the real historical development of communism throughout the world by ascribing its origin and progress to the fabulous and romantic intrigues, wholly figmentary, of this association about whose secret power he spread the most ridiculous and fantastic accounts. The fact that this circular had such an effect on the members of the League of the Just proves that they were something more than strawbingers and that they had learned more from English history than Engels supposed. Although their organization was referred to as an Essene association and came in for one or two very unfriendly remarks, they took it in much better part than Weitling, who was not mentioned at all, but who nevertheless went over to Krieger. As a matter of fact, the League of the Just in London had remained much fresher and more vital in the invigorating and cosmopolitan atmosphere of London than its counterparts in Zurich and even in Paris. Intended in the first place for propaganda amongst the German workers, it had adopted an international character in London. It maintained close relations with political fugitives from all manner of countries, and, with the example of the Chartist movement before it, which was rapidly growing in power and activity, its leaders broadened their horizon and progressed far beyond their old handicraft conceptions. Apart from the older leaders, Schapper, Bauer, and Moll, younger men, such as the miniature painter, Karl of Heilbronn, and the tailor, Georg Acarius of Thuringia, distinguished themselves by their theoretical ability. The authorization which Moll presented to Marx in Brussels and afterwards to Engels in Paris was dated January 20, 1847 and written by Schapper. It was drafted with a certain amount of caution and authorized the bearer to report on the situation of the League and to give detailed information on all important points. But in conversation Moll was much less reserved. He requested Marx to join the League and dispelled his original objections by informing him that a League Congress was to be called in London with a view to accepting the critical opinions expressed by Marx and Engels, and incorporating them in a public manifesto as the principles of the League. However, he declared, Marx and Engels must join the League and assisted to overcome the old-fashioned and reluctant elements. Marx and Engels allowed themselves to be persuaded and they both joined the League. However, for the moment the result of the League Congress which took place in the summer of 1847 was no more than a democratic reorganization to suit the needs of a propagandist body compelled to work in secret, but eschewing all conspiratorial airs. The League was organized in communes of not less than 3 nor more than 10 members, in circles, leading circles, the central authority and the Congress. Its aims were declared to be the overthrow of the bourgeoisie, the establishment of the rule of the proletariat, the abolition of the old society based on class contradictions, and the building up of a new society without classes and without private property. In accordance with the democratic character of the League, which now called itself the Communist League, the new statutes were first of all placed before the individual communes for discussion, the final decision being left to a second Congress which was to be convened before the end of the year and which would also discuss the new program of the League. Marx was not present at the first Congress, but Engels was there as the representative of the Paris Communists and Wilhelm Wolff as the representative of the Brussels Circle.